Hello, and welcome to the Talking Michigan Transportation Podcast. I'm Jeff Cranson. After taking a hiatus from the podcast last week, I'm excited to share a conversation with Sam Krassenstein, who's playing a leading role in rethinking the infrastructure that is so vital to the resurgence of the city of Detroit. We touched on a lot of things, how to right-size streets built to accommodate vehicles in a pre-freeway era, how safe mobility and accessibility play into the recovery of the city's neighborhoods, and the innovative thinking going into the I-375 and Michigan Avenue projects. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Once again, I'm with Sam Krassenstein, who's the Chief of Infrastructure and Department of Public Works Director for the City of Detroit. Sam, this is your first time on TMT, which nobody calls it but me, but it is transportation, so we have to have an acronym. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So talk first about your background and your career trajectory and, what brought you to this position, being kind of the point person on all things mobility for Detroit.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So, I'm not a Michigan native. I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I went to school in Pennsylvania at Bucknell, studying economics and management and finance. And so, I spent a few years working in Washington, D.C., trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And like all people trying to figure out what they wanted to do, I decided to go back to grad school. So I was fortunate to be able to start grad school at Michigan, doing my MBA program and my master's of urban planning. And while I was there, I decided to, while my friends were taking internships with Amazon and these, large consulting companies and going to Wall Street, I decided to take an unpaid internship with the city of Detroit. It's a little atypical for an MBA at Michigan. So, I started with the city in summer of 2016, working with our public works team. And I really just had the opportunity to get to spend a lot of time in the field dealing with our operations, everything from how we do trash collection and manage illegal dumping, to going out with our paving crews, seeing how we resurface streets, how we fill potholes, how we fix signs and signals. And I just found it really, really interesting. So at the end of the internship, I had the opportunity to sit down with Mayor Duggan, and he offered me a part-time job on the spot to continue, working for the city while I finished grad school. So for the next 2 years, I, worked for the city part-time while I was doing my studies in Ann Arbor, commuting back and forth. And in 2018, I was able to join the city full-time, just doing special projects in the infrastructure and transportation realm, where I really found my sweet spot early on, and where I found a gap that, I thought we could be doing better on was around the area of utility coordination. So what I mean by that is anytime we resurface a street, the problem we were seeing with the resurgence of Detroit is not only were we fixing the streets, but the utilities, whether it's the Detroit Water and Sewerage Department or DTE or telecoms, everyone wanted to make investments. So the issue we were running into, which we hadn't run into in a long time, was we'd resurface a street, and sometimes even before the project was done, we'd have a utility there with either permit work or planned work digging up our brand new pavement. So where I started focusing on early on is, well, there has to be a better way into how we coordinate. So I started working with the team on doing more capital planning, building collaboration, building coordination with all of our partners, including our partners at the county and state, to say, hey, let's share our capital plans a few years out so we can make sure that we're doing this work in a way that makes sense. And sometimes that means we really coordinate the work and we do it together, and other times it just means that we're doing it in the right order. So I had the opportunity. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's great, because the mantra has been dig once for a long time, but it's harder than it sounds because of that coordination. So I really appreciate you're focusing on that.
Yeah, and it's super hard to solve. You run into issues that different agencies have different budget constraints for when they can spend money, how flexible they can be, where they're going to be in the road, what's their method of construction. So, adopting a dig once philosophy is really good in principle. But in practice, it's often even just sharing plans to know, hey, are we going to be working in the same part of the road? Or can we at least wait to do the surface part of the project that the whole public sees and do our little bits of underground separately, even if it's not technically dig once? So, we made a lot of progress on that front. And then in 2021, with the passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the mayor asked me to step up into this role of chief of infrastructure. Having one point person that's going to be laser focused on the infrastructure bill, bringing funding back to the city, and making sure we have a really strong project pipeline. So I've been able to work across all the different departments that deal with transportation and infrastructure at the city, and have been able to work really closely with MDOT over the last few years on all of their great projects that are also happening within Detroit. So for the last few years, I've been doing that. We've been really successful in winning awards ourselves and then partnering with MDOT on bringing funding back to the city, including like our $25 million raise grant for Michigan Avenue, the $105 million we got through the infra grant for the 375 project, the Reconnecting Communities Planning grants for the 75 freeway cap project, and a bunch of other ones where, we've been just really successful in attracting all this funding so that we could do really cool transportation projects that are long overdue within the city.
Let's talk a little later about some of those specific projects. I wanted first, as part of our table setting here, you talked about your education and what brought you to transportation from kind of the urban planning side, but it seems like from following you that you've developed this real passion for safe mobility for all users. Can you talk about what informs that?
Absolutely. And so, one of my first real exposures to this, apart from living in DC, which is my first time living in like a big city. I grew up in suburban Pittsburgh, but living in DC gave me exposure to like what an urban environment can and should be like. And then in one of my classes at Michigan, we were doing a transportation planning class, and one of our projects was to pick a segment of road or pick an intersection that we thought could be safer, and to develop a plan for how you would make it safer, and to interview people, what's their perception of safety. And it was really eye-opening just understanding, well, what are those tools? What goes into transportation planning and traffic engineering? There's a whole world I had not appreciated, and how divisive of a field it is as well. You ask like 3 transportation planners or traffic engineers on what's a way to make a particular intersection safer, you may get 3 different answers. So one of the areas I became really attuned to working in the city is the dangerous driving and really unsafe nature of our streets. So in 2018, we formed this group, our Complete Streets team, that started to build out what we call our high injury network, really analyze what is the safety of our roadways. And what we found out is, we have the unenviable position of having the second highest fatality rate in the whole country for vehicle-related crashes, and especially for pedestrians. And you start peeling that back, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is that we have a disproportionately high number of people that don't have access to a car, that rely on alternative forms of transportation, whether it's, taking the bus or walking or biking. And our transportation setup is just really not designed. As Detroit reached its peak population in the 50s with a population of near 2 million people, and our road network reflects that. And so we have a lot of roads in which the cross section has really not changed over the last 50, 60, 70 years, where you have roads that are designed for way more cars than are actually out there today. And when we have these streets that are overbuilt, it causes people to drive faster. It's really hard for people to pay attention to a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit when the road is 7 lanes wide and there's not much traffic. You find yourself very easily, even if you're not trying to speed, you find it very natural to drive 50 plus miles an hour. And meanwhile, you have people trying to cross the street where the bus drops them off, and it's a recipe for people getting hit.
This has probably occurred to you that everything you're talking about was trying to accommodate the shrinkage of the city, and now you're seeing growth again. So do you wonder sometimes if you lose some of that capacity, if you're going to wish you had it back?
I don't think so. And the reason for that is I think people travel a lot differently now than they did in the past. And, realistically, even though we're back on the growth trajectory here, our streets were very well built for, really good levels of service, even when we had 2 million people. So even on a growth trajectory here, we're back up, we gain a couple 100,000 people. What we have today that we did not have when a lot of these roads were built is like we have the freeway system. So when a lot of the roads, like particularly like the larger trunk lines like Gratiot and Grand River and Woodward were constructed, there was no I-94 or I-96 or 75. Those were the primary ways in and out of the city. And as those freeways were constructed, those trunk lines really did not change a whole lot in terms of like how many lanes there were and what they're being used for. They just are, I don't want to say they're relics of the past, but there are things that have, that were built and have really, stayed throughout the test of time. And now those are our areas where we're really focusing, where the capacity exists on our overall network in the city. Even if we have tremendous growth, we're just kind of shifting like, well, how do those people get around?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And obviously we'll talk a little bit too about how public transportation can factor into this. But I'm very excited as a Michigan native about all the great things happening in Detroit. It has to be a fun time for you to be there. Obviously, infrastructure and mobility factor into the resurgence, but I think it's interesting that the structure begun in 1973 was named the Renaissance Center, and now the city is in a true renaissance, and the Renaissance Center's future is in peril. That probably hasn't lost on you.
Yeah, there's definitely some irony there, but it's the evolution of a city. I think it makes sense that as the city grows and evolves, there are things that will change with that. And some of those things are really hard things that people have a lot of nostalgia, things that are iconic. But for where the city's going, they no longer meet the needs. And like it's going to be a really hard problem to solve. And whatever solution they come up with for the Renaissance Center, it's guaranteed that not everyone is going to be happy. There's no way. There's no solution that would everyone. That you come up with a solution for something like that everyone thinks, hey, this is the best possible thing that could be done. There's always going to be people that have differing views.
Yeah, well, you in talking to you, I'm really impressed with how quickly you've learned so much about the city, and I'm interested in your thoughts about the recovery in neighborhoods like Corktown, where I always wonder who's buying those really cool condos, or Midtown, or Lafayette Park, or Grandmont Rosedale. Is it younger generations, you think, choosing urban life, or is it empty nesters seeking the vibe, or all of the above?
I think it's a little bit of both. So, our family, we live on the east side of Detroit over in the Indian Village area. And for us, for me working for the city, it was important for us that, if we're working for the city, that we live in the city to, represent our constituents and to really live the, more urban lifestyle here. And what we've seen like in our neighborhood and just around the neighborhood, we're seeing a ton of younger families that are moving in the city that like the idea of being close to the riverfront, like the idea of being downtown, and, feel like it's a very safe and comfortable place to be where, there's not a lot of cities where, you can buy a house affordably and like live 10 minutes from the core of the downtown. And so there's a lot there's a lot to be offered here for the younger groups. And as these like larger corridors, like on Michigan Avenue for Corktown, or any of the streetscape projects the city has done to spur economic development, we're seeing those neighborhoods come back. One of the really cool projects that we're really trying to get into the neighborhoods on is the development of the Joe Louis Greenway, which is a 30-mile on and off street greenway that creates a ring around the city, going all the way from the riverfront all the way to the west side in Dearborn, where we're creating this really great, it's basically like a rails to trails program where we're taking this abandoned rail infrastructure, these properties that have been blighted for decades, and we're turning it back to productive use, where we're creating these really nice play spaces and green spaces and greenways for people to get around that solve a couple purposes. One is, removing the blight, which is huge for bringing those neighborhoods back. The second is for transportation, to be able to give people a safe way to be able to get around the city, not on the street. And the third is, creating these like recreation spaces that, people have easy access to park space. And what we're already starting to see is like as the Greenway comes together, as we're constructing different parts of it, the neighborhoods immediately adjacent to the greenways are coming back with it. So we're seeing investment in the housing stock. We're seeing that people just want to go and like be in these neighborhoods where, it would have been a different story 5 to 10 years ago with what the state of these areas were. So we're seeing the neighborhood investments really come back, and that's purely a function of the transportation systems that we're building alongside them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. It's really cool to see. I mean, it's so different now. When I was a kid going to Tiger Stadium, Corktown doesn't look like that anymore. But I think you and others are trying to balance that historic nature, that culture, with modern needs. And so that brings me to some of the projects and some of your priority initiatives. Maybe we can spend a minute on each of these. But let's talk first about Michigan Avenue and how rethinking Michigan Avenue factors into what's going on in that neighborhood.
Well, it's a project that's definitely well overdue. Anyone who's driven down Michigan Avenue in Corktown knows it's a bumpy ride. So we know that there has to be some kind of investment into the streets. And with Ford buying the Michigan Central Station and just doing a beautiful job rehabbing that, in addition to all the other investments that have been happening on the corridor, the timing's right to really rethink, well, how does Michigan Avenue as one of these large trunk lines operate? And so it's been a little bit of a bumpy road figuring out like what is in the best interest of the residents and the neighborhood and everything, and getting a lot of really good points of feedback. We started on this idea that we were going to create a dedicated autonomous vehicle lane. And as the technology developed pretty quickly, it became apparent, well, AVs are really not going to use dedicated lanes. And so we started to rethink our design and, well, what accomplishes the most of the needs here. And we landed on a really good project that's going to really narrow down Michigan Avenue into a way that makes it a lot more walkable, a lot more pedestrian friendly. We're adding space for sidewalk cafes. We're adding better bike facilities. We're reconstructing the road so it's going to last another generation, and we're saving a good amount of the historic bricks out there to be reused in the streetscape facade to really give it a sense of place. And the timing of it really makes a lot of sense with what's happening at Michigan Central, with some of the news to the west, with the future of the DCFC soccer team. And it's all coming together in a relatively short period of time where the road really is going to serve as the backbone that connects the commercial neighborhoods in Corktown with the residences to the south, the new housing stock that's being built north of 75. It's really cool to see all those different elements coming together over the next 3 or 4 years here.
Yeah, well, I think Michigan Avenue is a case in point of, the observation you made about the RenCen that it's really going to be hard to get a complete consensus. And no matter what you do, somebody's going to be unhappy. But I think you're making strides and you're working very closely with the MDOT team there, trying to accommodate as many people as possible.
Yeah, I mean, change is hard. On any project that we do, there's always it's a fear of the unknown and a complacency with how things are. Things aren't perfect, but we've lived with it. So why are you messing with it? Well, we're messing with it because from our point of view as transportation experts, there are things that don't work well that we think could work a lot better. And the road infrastructure of 50, 60, 70 years ago is not the needs of today. And so we're continuing to make progress on that. And it's a challenge every step of the way, but it's a good challenge. This is change should be hard because it forces us to ask hard questions and to get feedback that forces us to really reevaluate what we think about what the right answer is. Because even though we're the transportation experts here, we don't know everything. There's a lot of input that we need throughout the process for every one of our projects to make sure we're designing the right thing that actually meets the needs of the people that live and work and play there.
Stay with us. We'll have more on the other side of this important message.
In Michigan, safety comes first on the roads. To combat distracted driving, Michigan passed the hands-free law.
The law makes holding or manually using a cell phone or other mobile electronic device while operating a vehicle a primary offense. This means an officer can stop and ticket you for violating the law.
This can include, but not limited to, sending or receiving a call, sending, receiving, or reading a text or email, accessing, reading, or posting to social media sites, or entering locations into the phone GPS.
With this law in place, drivers are encouraged to stay focused, keeping their hands on the wheel and their attention on the road. Drive smart, drive safe, drive hands-free.
Michigan's hands-free law, making the roads safer for everyone.
Let's talk about the ongoing efforts. And in this effort, you guys at the city, you and your colleagues are working really closely with MDOT officials and the private consultants who are working on converting I-375 from a stub freeway into an urban boulevard that tries to capture what it was originally as a surface street and the vitality of the neighborhoods. You've heard it over and over again, and I've been saying this back since we started talking about this in 2013, that we can't undo the sins of the past. We can't recreate Black Bottom and Paradise Valley. But as part of this, we can certainly pay homage to them and their history and the culture, but also create something that's exciting for the people who live in the neighborhood and connects them to downtown. As you talked about, being close to that core downtown is one of the really thrilling things about this resurgence of Detroit. So how do you feel about the 375 project and where it's at now?
I'm really excited about it. As a transportation guy, I think it's really cool. I was up till 1 o'clock last night just reviewing the base plans before they were due. Our first set of comments were due back today. So I was really into it last night. We had actually the meeting I was coming to right before this. We were talking about our next public meeting, which is going to be in early April. And so it's really cool to be part of this project where, it's going to be immense change, even if you didn't have the historical context and the displacement of the residents and businesses in Black Bottom. Just from a pure transportation perspective, it is a really cool and interesting project. And so I try to consistently look at it through that lens on what are the transportation features that are going to change. So the project really has, I would say, two main elements. One is the boulevard aspect, we're removing 375, we're bringing it up to grade, and we're making a much more urban street, which is should result in meaningful development with new properties being put online, much better connectivity between downtown and Lafayette Park, between downtown and Eastern Market, in between all these neighborhoods in the riverfront. But the other really interesting part of this is the whole 75 interchange. And so I think that this is just going to be so much safer and so much more logical for people that are coming downtown. So you think about your experience coming down I-75 today, and if you're driving down 75, you know that you're constantly dealing with weaving traffic, people getting on at the max exit that are cutting across to go down 375, whereas you have people coming down 75 that are going the opposite way just to continue to points further south downriver or wherever they might be going on 75. And as a result, there's always crashes, there's always backups, and it's it's a little bit of white knuckle driving. Maybe not as bad as I-94, but it's still you really have to have your wits about you. And so one of the cool things about this is it's just going to make a much more logical experience for people that are traveling on the freeway, that are coming downtown. And I think it's going to be a little bit confusing at first, as all change is, but I think the benefits of it, just from being able to move easily around the city, whether you're on foot getting across on the bridges above or driving on the freeway below, I think it's going to end up making a lot more sense for a lot of people pretty quickly. And so I think that part of it is really cool.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. And you get the podcast gold star for calling them crashes, which is appropriate. So
as a safety guy, that's number one. Our mantra is that all crashes are avoidable.
Yes, absolutely. Good for you. We should have a whole podcast on that sometime.
I would love to just talk about safety.
Well, just for a minute here, as we get to the close, I do want to talk to you about last May, Senator Peters invited you to testify before the Subcommittee on Surface Transportation, Maritime Freight, and Ports. That's a mouthful. But you got to go to the subcommittee hearing entitled Examining the Roadway Safety Crisis and Highlighting Community Solutions. Just could you summarize quickly the gist of your testimony and how that went?
Well, number one, I'm humbled by the experience, the opportunity to be able to go to our nation's capital to testify before senators is it's just a really cool experience to sit in there and like, see people you see up on the news and see like, people you have a lot of respect for, like Gary Peters, right in front of you, asking you questions and asking for your opinion. What you think about the road safety crisis. And so like that, number one, first and foremost, like I was truly humbled to be there and to be able to represent Detroit and the state of Michigan. The biggest part of what I wanted to get across is the value of having funding that can be geared towards safety. So with my testimony, I talked a lot about the Gratiot corridor, M3, between 8 Mile and downtown. And it's, one of these like larger trunk lines that I mentioned earlier, but it also happens to be our most dangerous. So we have streets like Gratiot where in a given year, we may have 10 fatalities and 100 serious injuries on like that 8 Mile stretch of road. And so for us, like we have a lot of roads that are like that. And so having this dedicated safe streets funding, which we've been really fortunate to, have received about $60 million from USDOT, that we're investing in nothing but safety. And so that's going to include doing things like more mid-block crossings, having protected parking, doing center line hardening, and doing things that, really get to the goal of reducing speeds. Like we've all heard the saying like speed kills. And so when we have these larger roads where people are driving 50, 60 miles an hour, we're much more likely to have these outcomes of, having fatalities and serious injuries. So being able to have that funding that we can gear towards driving down speeds and creating safer roadways was the biggest part of like what, my goal was with being able to testify before some of the senators.
Do you remember any of the questions or comments? Like did you have much back and forth?
There was a little bit. A lot of the focus of that hearing ended up shifting a little bit more to autonomous and electric vehicles. And so it was a little bit back and forth on what questions we were talking about, pure road safety, and ones that were talking more towards autonomous vehicles, getting into like with like electric vehicles. Well, do we need to be changing the design of our roadways based on the weight of electric vehicles? Very important question. And then getting into like the safety merits of autonomous vehicles. But at the end of the day, autonomous or normal vehicles, you still have the infrastructure to deal with. And like having automated vehicles solves part of that, but the infrastructure is still kind of the key underlying piece. So that was kind of the key message that I tried to get across, is how important updating that infrastructure is to dealing with road safety. Yes, like the vehicles and the driver behavior is one, but you can't pretend that the engineering and the design of the roads doesn't play a major factor in it.
Yeah, I haven't talked about AVs on the podcast in some time. For a while. That was really the buzz. And I'm still amazed when I talk to people about this, that if you ask many people, they'll be like, no, I'm not ready for that. I don't trust the vehicle. I don't trust the computer. And I'll say, well, do you have lane assist on your car? And they'll say, yeah, that's helpful. You have a backup camera? Yeah. Do you have automatic braking? Yeah, I have all those things. Those are all great. But well, then, it's when you put all that together, that's what's going to make an autonomous vehicle or an automated vehicle. It's kind of the stone soup metaphor, of how these things build up and you don't even realize where you're getting. So I hope that mindset starts to change as the technology improves. Every time there was a crash early on, it made headlines. Oftentimes it was the vehicle being piloted by a driver that caused the crash, but that gets lost, as you know. So tell me quickly what your thoughts are about that.
I mean, no question. The features that go into autonomous vehicles are, have saved lives and will save lives. And I say this with full disclosure that I drive a car with no technology whatsoever. I have my primary vehicle is a 2008 Ford Crown Victoria. So it's about as low tech as you can get.
Wow.
But having said that,
that's like an old cop car.
It is. It's a former federal vehicle that I bought as a used car when I was doing my commute back and forth from Ann Arbor. And 10 years later, it's still running strong with 150,000 miles on it.
Wow. Yeah.
But back to the AVs. Everything you listed, every technological advancement towards safety, it matters, and it's going to help the ultimate success, whether it's 5 years from now or 20 years from now, on autonomous vehicles. Things like lane assist, things like the emergency braking, backup cameras. Each piece of those, even if it doesn't result in full autonomy, it results in you have fewer fewer crashes and fewer incidents that are happening that result in injuries and deaths. And so I think like we're definitely on the right track with getting these safety features, even if it doesn't ultimately culminate in a vehicle that, you know, purely drives itself from point A to point B. We're still making headwinds on these safety features that are going to save lives.
Thanks a lot for doing this, and we could talk forever, I think, about these things. Your passion really is great, and I'm really happy that I'm happy you're in Detroit, because you're there at a good time and clearly care about the city and the people. So that's awesome.
Me too. I'm happy to be here. Maybe next time we talk, we can talk more trains next episode.
So Sam, thanks again for being here. Thanks for all you're doing for the city. I really appreciate it. Appreciate your passion, and good luck in your future endeavors.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
I'd like to thank you once more for tuning in to Talking Michigan Transportation. You can find show notes and more on Apple Podcasts or Buzzsprout. I also want to acknowledge the talented people who help make this a reality each week, starting with Randy Debler, who skillfully edits the audio, Jesse Ball, who proofs the content, Courtney Bates, who posts the podcast to various platforms, and Jackie Salinas, who transcribes the audio to make it accessible to all.